Yeah, it's on.
All right, cool. Can you see this?
Yeah, but do you want me to zoom it in more?
I don't know that you have. No, I don't want. Don't mess with it. All right, cool. So.
Oh, it's falling.
It does. It should follow me.
Oh, wow.
No way. Whoa.
Well, whatever.
Put it around your neck.
Well, no, I know, but I wanted to be in on that. But okay. All right. So, okay. So, we have these internal problems in China. We have growing corruption. We have a weakening government. I don't know if you guys remember back when we talked about China months ago. We talked about the role. One of the classes was this scholar gentry. And we have these very wealthy landowners who, when China starts to disintegrate as a centralized state, these wealthy landowners are exerting more power and more influence and building up their own armies to, not pay taxes to the Qing and protect themselves. But things are not going well in China. They're bad internally with their government. They're bad externally. We have all these foreign entities coming in and carving out territories with the spheres of influence. A lot of the Chinese people think that China is ripe for a new dynasty. The Qing has run its course. We need a stronger government that is better able to deal with these foreign incursions. So we see a major uprising that's essentially a civil war that lasts for 15 years and is incredibly deadly conflict known as the Taiping Rebellion. The leader of the Taiping Rebellion is this guy, Hong Xiuquan, and he is interesting. He's memorable. So he has an interesting story about him. Story goes is that he was, trying to take these examinations in the examination system to get a position in government. And the way the exams work is, you have to pay to take them. They're very hard. You study for a long time. And he goes and he takes this exam and he fails. And then he goes back the next year and he fails again. And he goes back the next year and he fails again. And he loses it. He breaks, right? It's like an existential crisis. He doesn't know what's going on in life. What's he doing here? And, it sounds like he drops into a little bit of a depression, whatever. But he has these, after he fails this third time, he has these vivid dreams where he sees this giant figure with a beard, and this giant figure is speaking to him saying that, this isn't his path. He's not meant for this. He's meant to go on and do other things. And he keeps having these dreams. He keeps having these visions. And he starts to talk to people about what he's seeing. And at some point, someone tells him, what you're talking about, this figure, and the way that he speaks, it sounds kind of like what those Christians are talking about, what those Christian missionaries are talking about. You should go talk to them. And he goes and talks to some Christian missionaries, and he becomes convinced that God is speaking to him. And he becomes convinced of more than that. He becomes convinced that he is Jesus' brother. Hong Xiuquan, Jesus' brother. And that his destiny is to lead a major uprising and rebellion against the Qing to overthrow this state. Now, the stories about him and these very vivid hallucinatory dreams seem oddly similar to what people describe opium dreams as being like, so something to potentially keep in mind there. But he goes through this existential crisis, this breakdown. He's having these vivid dreams. This, giant bearded, figure emanating light is speaking to him saying, your destiny is bigger than this. You have a different destiny. You are destined to lead, this uprising, to establish a new state and to establish a kingdom of heavenly peace. Sorry, a heavenly kingdom of great peace. And that's where the name Taiping comes from. That's what it translates as. So Hong Xiuquan, he starts gathering followers. And he gathers a lot of followers, millions and millions of followers. And he starts a rebellion. He starts an uprising against the Qing government. Now, some of the things that he's fighting for is he's fighting for massive amounts of land redistribution. He wants to take land from those wealthy landowners who've been growing in power and redistribute it to the peasants. He is advocating for an abolition of private property, for free public education accessible to everybody. What does this sound like? Communism. What part especially should send alarm bells off in your head? This is communism. Abolition of private property. If you ever see abolition of private property, that's communism. People who are advocating for everyone to have access to certain things, that is not inherently communism. But once you get no more private property, that is communism. He is advocating for communistic things. He also, he wants to create this Sinicized Christian state. He's claiming to be the brother of Jesus. He also wants greater equality between men and women. So he wants more rights for women, great equality of the sexes, but he still thinks that they should have different spheres and different realms. There should be, this is what the women do, this is what the men do, but they should be treated more equally by the government. Zoe.
Wait, how does that work out? Like, does being like a stepbrother do that? Or like,
What do you want? I don't know. He says he's Jesus' brother. All things are possible in the eyes of God. I don't know. I don't know.
I was just gonna ask if it was like symbolic or is it actually like his biological.
Based off everything, I don't think this guy thinks it's symbolic. Right? Whatever. And he gets a lot of followers, right? And this is his MO. Where did my mouse go? Oh, way over here. Yes.
What do the missionaries tell him? Like when he thinks that he's Jesus, or rather?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know about that. I doubt they're like, yes, but he kind of gets this sense of divine purpose, right? That, these seemingly opium-inspired dreams, but maybe not, right? Maybe they're just vivid hallucination that come with a existential mental crisis, whatever, right? He's going through tough times. And some people say it sounds like Christianity. He goes and talks to these Christian missions. They tell him about the religion a little bit more, because at least according to the story, he hadn't really interacted with Christianity up until that point, which makes him all the more convinced that he's been chosen by God, right? Anyway, but I doubt the Christian missionaries are like, sounds good to me, right? I'm sold. I doubt that that's the story. Remember, if it's in red, you don't have to write it down. This conflict that ends up happening, this Taiping Rebellion, is an unbelievably massive conflict. It is the deadliest conflict worldwide in the 1800s. You have the most populous country in the world, it's either that or India, right, at war with itself. Hong Xiuquan is able to get significant numbers behind him, and he has a lot of support of peasants. And he has a lot of support of people who are anti-foreign government. Ultimately, this is against the Qing. They're trying to overthrow the Qing. And he has a lot of support, and he's able to build an army. He's able to take over cities. That he gets a navy. This goes on for 15 years, and we see over 20 million people die as a result of this conflict. It is an incredibly deadly conflict. But ultimately, the Taiping Rebellion fails. Those wealthy landowners who, as the Qing government has been declining in power, wealthy landowners have been growing in power. And they start gathering troops for themselves, right? And they start sending people to fight against the Taiping. Why might wealthy landowners be very keen on making sure Hong Xiuquan doesn't rise to power?
Because if Hong Xiuquan rose to power, they wouldn't have their private property.
They have the most to lose, right? Abolition of private property, massive redistribution of land. They're going to have their land taken from them, given to peasants. They're going to lose this, amount of wealth that they have gathered, right? They have a huge amount to lose by this. Yeah. The other group that aids the Qing, so they're fighting against the Qing primarily, but these foreign nations that have these spheres of influence, they also come to the aid of the Qing and help. Essentially, they're like, we don't want this to end. If this Taiping rebellion is successful, we don't know what's going to, crop up. This Qing government is perfect for us now because they're so weak. Foreign nations want this rebellion to fail so that they can maintain their spheres of influence, that they can, continue this kind of scramble for China thing that's happening during this time period, right? This rebellion ultimately fails. But the complaints and the issues that led to this don't go away. Peasants are feeling increasingly unhappy in China that they're not getting their fair share. There's some in China who think that there should be greater and equal rights for women. The Ming are a heavily Confucian state. The Qing are a heavily Confucian state. As Confucianism is in the ascendancy, rights and opportunities for women are declining in China. They have a inverse relationship to each other, right? They want more rights for women. They want massive redistribution of wealth and massive redistribution of land. These things don't go away. This one is unsuccessful. And it ends in, 65? I don't know years. When's it end? 64, right? It ends in 64. The Chinese Communist Revolution starts about 50, 60 years later, right? And it's going to have a lot of the same end goals. It's not going to have the same Sinicized quasi-Christianity element, but it's going to draw off peasant support for redistribution of land, more equality for women, and that one succeeds. Does that make sense? So these, the rallying cries and the changes that they want to see don't go away. They aren't fixed. They aren't corrected. And 50 years later, we see another uprising begin, right, with similar goals. Questions on Taiping? All right. We have another rebellion in China. Oh, well, no, I want to do Boxer. All right, fine. We'll do self-strengthening. Okay. So various countries, the Ottoman Empire, the Qing dynasty, Japan, and others as well, but those are three of the major states at the time. They're all confronted with similar issues. That issue is European dominance, European imperialism. Whatever the Europeans are doing is working. Europeans are carving out sections of China. They're taking away territory from the Ottomans. They take all of India. They take all of Africa except Ethiopia. They take all of Southeast Asia. Countries like the Ottoman Empire, countries like China, countries like Japan, they see what's happening and they're faced with this question. Like, how do we deal with this? Do we abandon our traditional ways of doing things, our traditional ways of organizing our governments, of organizing our education system, of organizing our military? Do we abandon the way that we've done things for thousands of years and move to this European model and attempt to compete? Is it a, if you can't beat them, join them type thing and we got to do what the Europeans are doing? Or do we stay true to our traditions, to our heritage, to our, values? And do we try to, incorporate maybe some of these European elements, some of this industrialization, without changing who we are at our core, right? And they're kind of struggling with this. How much do we change? How much do we adopt European methods, European values, and how much do we stay true to our traditions, our values? Historically, China isn't one to change for others, right? China is the center of the world. China is the place where everyone else comes to China because they produce so much stuff. They're the height of culture. They view themselves as the height of culture in the world. But they're at a low point. They're in a century of crisis. They don't know it's a century yet, but they're at the early stages of a century of crisis. And some of the officials, some of the leaders recognize a need for change. They need to change the way they do things. So there's a movement in China called the self-strengthening movement. They want to adopt some of the technologies, some factories, some railroads, some more industrial, military machine guns, industrialized navy, but they don't want to change their method of organization, their values, their institutions. They just want to adopt piecemeal, a little bit here, a little bit there, of the way that Europeans do things. They want to borrow from the West. So this movement is called the self-strengthening movement. They want to stay traditional Chinese in most of their institutions and values, but they want to adopt and borrow certain elements from the West. They start to build some railroads. They start to build some factories. They start to incorporate, machine guns and try to incorporate some of that technology into their militaries. But this doesn't have full support of the government. There's some leaders in China don't like these movements, don't like these self-strengthening movements. They think that they're veering too far away, that they're not staying true to who they are as a people. So you have some leaders, I can't remember her name. Who started reading chapter 18? CIXI? Does that name come up? She takes some of the money, there's money allocated. It's hey, we're going to use this money to modernize our military. And she says, screw that, I'm building myself a boat. And it's not even a boat that you can use. It's a marble boat. It's a boat made out of marble. Or is it jade? No, I think it's marble. You can't even, you throw it in the water, it sinks. She built herself this elaborate marble boat instead of modernizing the military, right? I know what we should spend our money on. We don't have any marble boats, right? That's what we need, more marble boats, right? Who cares about cannons on ships and steel-plated ships with machine guns? No. Marble boats, that's what China needs more of right now, right? So we have some government officials who don't want to change, who don't want to do things the European way, right? So that's emperors refusing to adopt reforms. All the while this is happening, we see the continued decay of the Qing state and the growing power of regional landowners. So self-strengthening, it's too little too late is the phrase that I tend to use for it. They don't want to industrialize a lot, just enough to kick the Europeans out. But they don't do enough. They build a few railroads, they build a few factories, they get a couple machine guns. And they still get crushed by the Europeans. It's not enough, right? It's too little, and it's too late, and it's opposed by people at high positions in government. I want to try to do Boxer Rebellion before we go. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. I see why that's not working. All right. So, we have another uprising in China called the Boxer Rebellion. And this uprising is not an attempt to kick out the Qing. It's not an anti-government rebellion. It's an anti-foreigner rebellion. It's a rebellion to try to kick out the European powers from China. I love the name of this group. The Europeans call them the Boxers, but they call themselves the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. That is a solid name, right? That's a solid name. Now, the reason that they call themselves this, and the reason that Europeans end up calling them the Boxers, this starts off as a secret society, right? It's a secret society. It's an anti-foreign society, and they're kind of building to this revolution. But they are relying on traditional values, and they practice like a form of Tai Chi as like a meditation. But they also think it gives them strength, and they think that it gives them certain powers. So before they start, uprisings and taking the fight to the Europeans, they all gather together and they do Tai Chi. Have you guys ever seen Tai Chi? I don't really want to do it because I don't know what I'm doing, and it would, well, no, I mean, it would just be like a joke. Like, I can't, whatever. They, and then they do, it's like slow motion, boxing, but it's not boxing. That's what it looks like to the Europeans, right? It's like slow motion martial arts with the idea of it being kind of meditative. But the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, they believe it makes them impervious to foreign weapons. They believe it makes them impervious to guns. It doesn't. This Boxer Rebellion doesn't go too well for the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. There's uprising in a couple of these spheres of influence in major cities controlled by Europeans. Again, it is not anti-government. The Qing are not sending troops to put this down. The Qing are like, yes, please, someone get these foreigners out. So they're not helping. But the Western powers, the imperializing powers, they send troops. Like 8 different nations send troops to put down this rebellion, including the United States. So this rebellion is also put down. It's an anti-foreign rebellion. But how are we on this?
Yeah.
I'm going to try to move this. Oh, actually, you know what? We should be good. But this is a picture showing the different troops that are sent to China to put down this rebellion. Stop moving. You have troops from England, Germany, Russia, India, all these. United States send troops. There's a variety of different nations, a coalition of nations send troops to put down the Boxer Rebellion, right? But this is China in its century of crisis. All right, questions on Boxers? So, chapter 18 is due next class. We'll see that if we can get through enough on Thursday to have a quiz on chapter 18 on Monday next week.